The clock ticked past midnight. The hands moved with a deliberate slowness, each second echoing in the stillness of the night. It was a time when the world seemed to hold its breath, waiting for something unseen to unfold. Red numbers glowed on the console, casting a faint, eerie light across the studio. The glow was almost hypnotic, a beacon in the darkness that surrounded me. It was a familiar sight, yet tonight it seemed to pulse with an unsettling energy. Silence hung heavy, broken only by the hum of equipment. The hum was a constant companion, a reminder of the technology that kept me connected to the outside world. Yet in the stillness of the night it felt like the only thing tethering me to reality. I am Mark, and this is my domain, the graveyard shift at WNDR. The hours between midnight and dawn were mine to fill, a solitary vigil in the heart of the night. It was a time when the world slept, and I was the lone sentinel, keeping watch over the airwaves. The city outside slept, oblivious to my solitude. Streets that bustled with life during the day were now deserted, bathed in the cold glow of streetlights. It was a different world, one that only a few of us ever saw. My voice, usually energetic, was a low murmur in the dead of night. The energy of the daytime shows was replaced by a quiet intimacy, a conversation between me and the unseen listeners who shared these hours with me. I spun a track, classic rock, a feeble attempt to fill the void. The music was a comfort, a link to a time when the world was awake and alive. Yet, in the stillness of the studio, it felt like a ghost, a reminder of what was missing. My eyes drifted to the phone lines, blinking, expectant. Each light represented a listener, someone out there in the darkness, reaching out for a connection. It was a lifeline, a reminder that I was not truly alone. A shiver ran down my spine. It was a sensation I had felt before, a sudden chill that seemed to come from nowhere. It was as if the night itself was alive, watching, waiting. Just the night playing tricks, I told myself. It was a mantra I repeated often, a way to keep the fear at bay. Yet, deep down, I knew there was more to it. The night had a way of revealing things, of bringing hidden fears to the surface. But deep down, a primal fear stirred. It was an ancient instinct, a reminder of a time when the darkness was filled with unknown dangers. It was a fear that was hard to shake, a feeling that something was out there, just beyond the edge of the light. Something felt different tonight, the air thick with anticipation. Or was it dread? It was a question that lingered in my mind, a shadow that refused to be dispelled. The night was full of possibilities, both good and bad, and I could only wait to see what it would bring. Time seemed to stretch, each minute feeling like an eternity. The clock on the wall was a constant reminder of the hours still to come, a countdown to the dawn that seemed so far away. It was a strange paradox, the night both endless and fleeting. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my nerves. The night had a way of getting under your skin, of making you question what was real and what was imagined. But I had a job to do, and I couldn't let the darkness win. I adjusted the microphone, preparing to speak. My voice was my weapon, my way of pushing back against the night. It was a small thing, but it was enough to keep the fear at bay, to remind me that I was in control. "Good evening, night owls," I said, my voice filling the studio. "This is Mark, keeping you company through the midnight hour. Let's see what the night has in store for us." It was a ritual, a way of marking the start of another hour, another battle against the darkness. I smiled, finding comfort in the routine. The night was full of uncertainties, but this was something I could rely on. It was a small victory, a reminder that even in the darkest hours there was still light to be found. The phone line crackled ominously. I jolted upright, heart pounding in my chest. A caller, unusual at this late hour. "You're on the air," I announced, my voice betraying a hint of nervousness and fear.
"They watched from the shadows, always watching."
The voice faded, swallowed by the relentless static. I adjusted the headphones, straining to hear any more. "Hello, can you hear me?" I asked, my voice echoing in the empty, silent studio. No response, just the insistent, eerie hiss of static. A prank call, I thought, dismissing it with a nervous, uneasy laugh, but the voice lingered in my mind, cold and deeply unsettling. I tried to shake off the unease. It clung to me like a second skin, an invisible weight pressing down on my shoulders. Every breath felt heavier, every heartbeat louder. I told myself it was just the late hour, the isolation of the studio playing tricks on my mind. Focused on the music, the playlist, I thought immersing myself in the rhythm would drown out the creeping dread. The beats were supposed to be my escape, my refuge from the encroaching darkness. But the silence between tracks seemed louder now, filled with unseen eyes. It was as if the pauses were pregnant with a presence, something lurking just beyond the edge of perception, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. The caller's words echoed in my mind. They watch from the shadows. Those words, simple yet chilling, replayed over and over, a sinister mantra that refused to be silenced. Ridiculous, I thought, just a prankster playing on the late-night loneliness. Yet the rational part of my mind struggled to hold on to that explanation. The voice had been too real, too filled with a knowing malice that gnawed at my confidence. But the shadows in the studio seemed to deepen, taking on sinister shapes. They moved and shifted as if alive, as if they were aware of my presence and were closing in on me. I found myself glancing over my shoulder, scanning the darkness. Every creak, every whisper of the building settling felt like a threat. My eyes darted around, searching for the source of my unease, but finding nothing tangible to latch onto. The red digital clock ticked away, each second a hammer blow on my nerves. Time seemed to stretch and warp, each minute feeling like an eternity. The relentless ticking was a cruel reminder of my growing paranoia. I tried to laugh it off, but the fear had taken root, twisting in my gut. My laughter sounded hollow, even to my own ears. It was a feeble attempt to mask the terror that was slowly consuming me. The studio, once my sanctuary, felt cold, hostile. The familiar walls seemed to close in. The equipment that had been my tools of creation now felt like instruments of my impending doom. The air itself seemed to thicken, making it hard to breathe, as if the room was alive and feeding off my fear. I paced the room, wringing my hands, trying to shake off the feeling of being watched. My mind raced, conjuring images of unseen watchers, their eyes boring into me from the shadows. I checked the locks, securing the doors and windows, but it did little to ease my mind. The sense of vulnerability was overwhelming, as if no barrier could keep out the unseen threat that loomed over me. Sitting down, I buried my head in my hands, trying to gather my thoughts. I needed to regain control, to find a way to dispel the shadows that had taken root in my mind. But the more I tried to rationalize, the deeper the doubt seemed to grow. I took deep breaths, attempting to calm down. Inhale, exhale. Each breath a struggle against the rising tide of panic. I told myself it was all in my head, a figment of my imagination, but the fear was real, tangible, and it refused to be ignored. I looked at my phone, contemplating calling for help. But who would I call? What would I say? That I was being haunted by shadows and whispers. The thought seemed absurd, yet the fear was all too real. Standing up, I resolved to face whatever was lurking in the shadows. I couldn't let the fear control me. I had to confront it, to shine a light on the darkness and dispel the shadows of doubt that had taken hold of my mind. I turned on all the lights, illuminating the room. The harsh brightness chased away the shadows, revealing the familiar, comforting surroundings of the studio. The fear began to recede, replaced by a renewed sense of determination. Sitting back at the mixing desk, I focused on the music once more. The beats, the rhythms, they were my anchor, my way back to normalcy. The shadows of doubt had been banished, at least for now. But I knew they would return, lurking at the edges of my mind, waiting for another moment of weakness. With a slight smile, I felt a sense of victory. I had faced the darkness and emerged stronger. The shadows of doubt had been a formidable foe, but I had proven that I could overcome them. And as the music filled the room once more, I knew that I was ready for whatever came next. More calls came, each one sending chills down my spine.
A child's voice, high-pitched and filled with terror, whispered, "The fire comes, it burns."
A gravelly voice rasped, "The water, it drowns."
Each call, brief, cryptic, filled with impending doom. I tried to rationalize them. Pranksters, I told myself, feeding off my fear. But the specificity of the calls, the sheer terror in the voices was unnerving. I started noting down the calls, the details, the voices. A futile attempt to find logic in the madness. But the more I wrote, the more the reality of it sank in. These weren't just calls, they were warnings. The studio, once a haven of music and late-night conversations, became a prison of fear. Every creak of the building, every rustle of wind against the window, sent my heart racing. Sleep became impossible. The calls had stopped, but the silence was worse. It pulsed with a sinister energy, a waiting game. I was living on a knife's edge, anticipating the next phone call, the next chilling prophecy. My reflection in the soundproof window stared back at me, a stranger with haunted eyes. The fear was changing me, consuming me from the inside out. I was trapped in a nightmare, broadcasting live to an unsuspecting city. The news came like a punch to the gut. A fire engulfing an apartment building, screams, sirens, the crackling of flames. I sat frozen, phone clutched in my hand as the reporter described the scene.
The fire comes, it burns.
Then a report about a boating accident, a sudden storm, a capsized vessel, people lost at sea.
The water, it drowns.
The words slammed into me, cold and sharp. This wasn't a game anymore. The calls, the chilling predictions were coming true. A wave of nausea washed over me. My hand trembled as I reached for the microphone, my voice a choked whisper.
This can't be happening.
The city, once a distant hum, was now a source of terror. The skyline, once a symbol of progress and hope, had transformed into a menacing silhouette against the stormy sky. The air was thick with tension, and every corner seemed to hide a new threat. I could feel the weight of the city's fear pressing down on me, making it hard to breathe. Every siren wail, every news bulletin confirmed my worst fears. The radio, once a source of music and joy, now only brought news of despair. Each broadcast was a new chapter in a never-ending nightmare. The blaring sirens outside were a constant reminder that danger was ever present, and there was no escape. I found myself covering my ears, trying to block out the relentless noise, but it was futile. The calls continued, each one a harbinger of tragedy. Friends and family reached out, their voices trembling with fear. They spoke of disasters, of lives shattered in an instant. The news headlines were a relentless barrage of horror, each one more shocking than the last. I recoiled in terror every time the phone rang, dreading the next piece of bad news. A car crash, a hit and run. The streets had become a battleground with chaos reigning supreme. I witnessed accidents that seemed almost surreal in their brutality. The sound of screeching tires and shattering glass haunted my dreams. Each incident was a stark reminder of the fragility of life and the ever-present danger lurking around every corner.
The metal beast. It devours. The machinery, once a marvel of human ingenuity, now seemed like a monstrous entity. Its relentless motion was a chilling reminder of the unstoppable forces at play. The shadows it cast were long and menacing, taking on a life of their own. It was as if the very fabric of reality was being torn apart by this mechanical behemoth.
My sanity frayed. The constant barrage of fear and anxiety took its toll. I could feel my grip on reality slipping away. Every day was a struggle to maintain some semblance of normalcy. I found myself pulling at my hair in frustration, desperate for a moment of peace. But peace was a distant memory, replaced by a never-ending cycle of dread. I became a recluse in the studio, afraid to leave, afraid to answer the phone, yet morbidly drawn to it. The studio, once a sanctuary of creativity, had become my prison. I was too scared to venture outside, too terrified to face the world. Yet, I couldn't help but be drawn to the phone, hoping for some good news, but always finding more despair. My hands trembled as I fidgeted with the phone, torn between hope and fear. The line between reality and nightmare blurred. Was I going mad? The world around me seemed to warp and twist, becoming a grotesque parody of itself. I looked into a shattered mirror and saw my own fear reflected back at me. It was as if the very essence of reality was crumbling, leaving me adrift in a sea of madness. I questioned my own sanity, wondering if I was losing my mind. The studio, once a place of comfort, became a cell of dread. The walls seemed to close in on me, the shadows growing longer and more menacing. I paced back and forth, unable to find any solace. The once familiar space had become a claustrophobic nightmare, filled with unseen terrors. Every creak and groan of the building sent shivers down my spine. The red digits on the clock seemed to mock me, counting down to the next horrific event. Time, once a steady and reliable constant, had become my enemy. The ticking of the clock was a relentless reminder that more horrors were on the horizon. I stared at the red digits, feeling a sense of impending doom. It was as if the clock was counting down to my own destruction. I was adrift in a sea of fear, with no land in sight. The world had become a desolate and stormy place filled with uncertainty and danger. I felt lost, like a lone figure on a stormy beach with no safe harbor in sight. The fog of fear clouded my mind, making it impossible to see a way out. I wandered through this nightmare, searching for a glimmer of hope, but finding only more darkness.